My son's a musician.
Mm.
He just got back from like a 75 city tour where they did all amphitheaters, like 15 or 20,000 people.
Hmm.
And there's tons of staff there, and they're all wearing, just says staff on it. And you look at some of these kids, and they've all got a vacant stare. They look underfed. They're not well groomed. They don't have things that kids their age would normally have. They're not whipping out smartphones.
Right.
They don't know each other. You just know that those kids are in a forced situation.
Right. So in there, I would look at how were they recruited? What kind of contract did they sign, if they have a contract even? So those are the types of things you'd want to look for in that particular industry. In a lot of our cases, people will be provided a contract, and then when they go to sign it, it's a completely different contract. But at that point, they feel like they already have to sign because they've made a verbal commitment. So there's a lot of things that we can look for as systems as well, right? It's not just a person-to-person thing. It is also looking at the systems that, like a recruitment system, that is exploiting these people. So events, you're right. Like as soon as you said a tour, my thought was looking at who's setting up for those tours, who's breaking all of it down, like kind of like the construction industry, because we've seen a lot of cases in construction as well, not just hospitality. So I think a lot of folks, because we aren't really covering this a lot enough in television and in the media about forced labor and how that can take place.
Okay, but what happens if, let's say you're at a restaurant and there's a busboy or girl over there that is, you can see them in the kitchen or they're bussing a table, and your gut tells you
Something's off.
this isn't right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Listen to that.
Then you say something to that young person. They've been really schooled on what to say and how to answer the question. What do you say to those people?
Right. And they're most likely being watched, and they know who's watching them, right? You might not know that, but they will know. And so they're probably not making direct eye contact. They probably don't want to answer your questions. It is important not to intervene. I want your listeners or your viewers to understand that.
You get them in a lot of trouble.
You could get them in trouble and make it worse for them. So, I remember many, many years ago, a colleague of mine, was at a restaurant, and they simply went to the restroom, and this was their favorite restaurant. And so they went to the restroom and they noticed that there was mattresses in the back in the kitchen, just kind of glanced out of the side of his eye. And that ended up being a human trafficking case. They were made to live there and work there. I've also handled cases at CAST where people who were trafficked domestically, so in a domestic servitude situation in a home, and that homeowner also owned a series of chain of restaurants, and they were forced to work at the restaurant at night and in the home in the day. They were basically working 24/7 with very little sleep and no pay. So what you would say to people like that, let's say it is in a restaurant scenario, you would say, "Are you okay? Okay, I understand if you can't talk, but here's a hotline number." And I know your producer said that you would put our hotline number on there for people to have. That is really important. If they can have something that is discreet, that they can maybe have in their pocket, and they call when it's safe to do so. We always say something at CAST, and that is that victims or survivors, they are the most knowledgeable about how to stay safe, not anybody else. So it's really up to them to make that call. What we can do as a society, as a community, is make sure that we've got 24/7 care so that when that person is ready to call, it might be 2 a.m, but that someone who is trained and well-versed in getting people to safety is on the other side of that phone call.
Mm-hmm. We've talked to our viewers about this, and I've had emails back from people that have done exactly that. They've written down a hotline number, a safe house number, a place
That's right.
in their city
Yep.
where they can go and have just walked past the bus boy or the girl cleaning the table or whatever and just put it in their pocket or handed it to them
Mm-hmm.
and said, here's a number if you need it. Just kept walking, not drawing attention to it. And sure enough, it might be a few hours, it might be a month, but that person uses that phone number and calls, and sometimes until they get the opportunity or they get the courage.
That's right.
And, maybe who's watching them goes out of town or goes to sleep or
Yep.
whatever.
Goes out on an errand.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you're saying reminds me of a case. It was about 4 years ago here in LA. And it was someone from another country who was trafficked there, but brought here on vacation with the family that was trafficking them. And they were staying in a very ritzy hotel, and no one would have suspected that. But the family went away that day. They had their children with them, and they went to an amusement park. And at that time, and I should back up, we have systems in place and laws in place in the US that CAST and all of our partners have collaborated on, so that when people are getting visas in their home country or in the country where they're from, they are kind of separated from the family or the employer and given the hotline information or given information if there is any trouble. This young woman, held that card it was actually in her bra strap for weeks until she had the courage to call our hotline number. So my staff, we have an emergency response team, and they jumped into action. They figured out which hotel that she was in, and they waited down the street, and they waited and they waited. And that girl, the young lady did not show up, but she called the hotline later that night and said she didn't have the courage to leave. She was afraid that the traffickers would come back to the hotel. But the next day, she actually did leave, and we were able to take her from that place and take her to our shelter. And so now, because of that, she's free today and, living her life. So you're right in saying that it's about an opportunity to escape, but it's also the courage.
They also need to know, maybe they're listening to this or a friend of theirs is listening to this right now. They need to know when they do make the call, they're not going to be pressured to do something they don't want to do
Never.
or they're not ready to do. I don't want anyone that's caught in this situation right now to think, oh man, when I make that call, I'm in it now. That's not true. What's going to happen is when they call that hotline number that's going to be on drphil.com, it's going to be on the podcast site, it's going to be on my Facebook page, it's going to be tweeted, it's going to be everywhere. When they make that call, the person on the other end is going to listen, they're going to answer questions, they're going to let them know what their options are. They're not going to get them in trouble.
Exactly. They're trained counselors and advocates, right? So it's not an arm of law enforcement. A lot of our clients, a lot of survivors are afraid to call a hotline because they think that it's law enforcement or government. And they're, for good reason, right? They have not had good experiences with law enforcement, which we can talk about in a little bit, how this issue of forced criminality is so huge in the issue of human trafficking. So it's important that they know this is a nonprofit organization. It is trained counselors and advocates who are there to listen and help them devise a plan that's comfortable for them, right? So a lot of what we do is safety planning on that hotline. And if someone's not ready to leave right there and then, that's okay. No one's going to force them to do that because they're in charge of their own safety. And we're kind of like a partner in helping them figure out a plan to escape.